Hello, everybody. It is 2:08, according to my microwave, and it's time to start our live stream. So, it's funny, when I think of what to talk about each week, I try to come up with something new. And we've done a lot of streams. I don't know. We're way up there, like 140. And in that scenario, it's possible to talk about the same things over and over. And occasionally, something will occur to me that we haven't talked about, and I will say to myself, well, this should have been talked about a long time ago. Big major oops. So I thought today we could talk about the reef lingo. And that is really the language we speak in, and people look at us like we're speaking a foreign language. So I thought that would be a fun one. So we can talk about some of the acronyms that come up so often in our hobby. And maybe it'll help you guys out a little bit when you're reading things online and you're wondering, what does that mean? Hi, everybody. I see all the people coming in. So welcome to the stream. And I know I say this from time to time, and you guys always tease me, but today's going to be a short stream because I have to keep working. But I did want to do our stream. I don't know. We're going to aim for maybe an hour or so, and then I just got to hop off of here. So let's start off with something that a friend told me years ago. He was listening to a different podcast about a different hobby, and he said it was so interesting how they kept saying the hobby or our hobby. And he said that's so weird because we all know saltwater is the hobby. But in that hobby, that was their major hobby, and everything else was a side thing. And oftentimes we say, welcome to the hobby, and our hobby is this, and people in the hobby. And it's kind of a fun terminology that we don't really give it a lot of thought to. So I thought that would be a good, fun starting point. But I made a list. And we're going to go into different terms and let me kind of explain some of them. And yeah, you can feel free to pop a few of those in the chat as well in case I miss something. But I will do my best to cover some of the most popular terms that are so often used and maybe even explain a little bit about them. So one of the biggest things that we come across when people see our tank for the first time is they will say, what are these? And typically we'll say they're corals. And people, kind of think they're plants. And then we will say, well, they're frags. I grew them from a frag. And they're like, what's a frag? And you're like, well, it's a fragment of a coral. So there's a coral growing in the ocean, and I got a frag, and I put it in my tank. And then, of course, that leads to the question, you took from the ocean? No, I can actually buy them at the fish store. Like, but it's a fish store. Why do they sell corals? And see what I'm saying? Our language seems so logical to us, and to them, it is completely foreign. So yes, we go to fish stores. And matter of fact, that's another one, LFS. We say it all the time. You see it typed all the time because it's easier to type 3 letters than it is to type local fish store. And then you've got people that will say, well, really, how local is your local fish store? And mine literally is within walking distance. So I can be there in, I guess if I walked, it would take me, 6 minutes to get there. It's about a quarter of a mile away. So I don't know, maybe it's faster, to get there. I don't know. I've never timed myself. I typically drive. But if I don't want to buy anything and the weather's decent, then I will walk because that way I don't have to worry about buying anything because I don't want to carry it back. But LFS is a very common term that we use, and a lot of times people say go to the LFS to buy this, and they're talking about going to a local fish store, something within your vicinity. Speaking of which, Reef Trace app has an awesome section called the LFS map. And it helps you locate fish stores near you wherever you are. So if you're out, and I always think of the U.S., but I realize it's international. But they have local fish stores listed in many countries around the world. So if you are somewhere in the U.S. or you're in Canada or you're Mexico or wherever, I hope I'm not saying a country that's not in there because I don't do the list. But it puts a target on the map where you are, and then it shows anything within 45 miles of you. That's considered local. So local fish stores is another good one. And then we have these terms like GHA, GSP, GFO, BTA, GAC. It's a whole bunch of acronyms, and they all mean something completely logical. Like GHA is something that no new hobbyist wants in their tank, and of course anyone with experience doesn't want it, and that's green hair algae. So GHA is one you'd be looking for. And then a common coral that's soft and easy to grow and is very bright green is GSP, which is green star polyps. So you may see someone talking about never put GSP in your tank, or they will say I have too much GSP, or what will get rid of GSP, and you're thinking, well, what is that? Now, keep in mind too, while I'm telling you these things, I don't expect you to memorize them. You can always just pop those 3 letters into Google and say, what does it mean? And it'll help you find the acronym's explanation almost every single time. So I would never be overwhelmed and think, it's unfindable. And then, of course, if you're in a saltwater group, you kind of need to learn the language because we're all talking that way. And it's not really hard, just it's frustrating at first when you're first joining. And then, as you get more acclimated to what we're doing, you start using acronyms too. And some people will throw out acronyms that don't exist. They will just type in some letters, and I'm thinking, what are they trying to say? And then, I'll figure, usually I can figure them out. Not always, but a lot of times I can. And if I can't, I just say, what does it mean? So there's nothing wrong with asking as well. Next one that's very popular is GFO. And they, when you're trying to control your phosphates in your tank, people always say, get a GFO reactor. You need to run GFO. They're talking about granular ferric oxide, which is a kind of rusty metallic particle that you can put inside a cylinder that has water pumping in, flowing through the GFO, and flowing back out without sending that matter into the tank. So you're basically just running water passively, no, I'd say actively, through this media, and the media will bind with the phosphates, and over time it will deplete its efficiency, and you have to replace it with more. But GFO is a very popular thing. It's been around for about 15 years, and a lot of people just say GFO. Another very popular acronym you'll see all the time is BTA, which is bubble tip anemone. I don't know, that just seemed to stick instantly. I don't think anyone would type that out, and they definitely didn't want to type out the Latin. So BTA is very common. RBTA would be rose bubble tip anemone. And then you've got other acronyms that are in the same family, like the sunburst bubble tip anemone, SBA. Sunburst. Bubble tip, yeah, SBT. So you've got a bunch of different ones out there that all have to do with the anemone family. There's also LTA, which is a long tentacle anemone. And so many times people will say, I bought this, I don't know what it is again, can someone tell me? And everyone debates. And you'll see a whole bunch of people saying LTA, 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 and that's long tentacle anemone. So it's always nice to know what they are. I want to drop this in real quick. Paul, thank you very much for the super chat. He's asking if anyone can help him find a Sherman Rose anemone in the UK. So I hope you're able to find one. I don't know. We have a lot of them here in the US. Let's see. GAC is another popular term that I use a lot, which has to do with activated carbon, granular activated carbon. I think I have a jar of it right here next to me. Yeah. So let's see if I can hold this up and you can see it. But these are fine grains that I put inside a reactor, and this is what filters your water and makes your water more clear when it has that tinge to it. And GHC is very good to use. Another choice, of course, is going to be pelletized activated carbon. And pellets are larger. It looks kind of like a mouse drop. No, I'd say more like hamster droppings. I don't know. They're a little bit longer, more cylindrical, and they work in reactors where you don't have sponges to capture the finer media. So GAC is very common. It's very inexpensive. A lot of people like to use it. I recommend using it every month for a few days. I've got it running on my tank right now, actually, because I'm trying to keep my corals healthy while they continue to try to irritate me. And I can't really control all of that, but GAC is very important in our tanks. DSP is another term that has been used for a very long time, which stands for deep sand bed. And a deep sand bed is considered to be 4 to 6 inches thick. So when you have a very large level of sand in your tank, that would be a deep sand bed. And then there's shallow sand bed, of course, or bare bottom, which might be funny when someone's listening to your phone call and you're telling someone on the phone, yeah, I got a bare bottom tank, and they're just like looking at you like, what did he just say? What is he talking about? And that just means there's no sand on the bottom. They like to have a glass bottom or an acrylic bottom, and they want to be able to just vacuum away detritus. So that is just the tip of our list for today. Let's see, I mentioned that one. QT is very popular because everyone says you should put your fish in QT, which stands for quarantine. A lot of people that buy equipment for their very first tank are told you need this type of filter, you need this type of skimmer, you need this type of reactor. And most commonly, they're looking for something that's HOB, which means hang on back. And hang on back equipment is nice at first, but then after a while, you're like, man, I really wish I didn't have to see all that stuff. I wish it wasn't visible. And that's why we use something called a sump. And there's no acronym for sump. Sump is sump. But it's nice to get rid of the HOB when you don't need to have it in plain sight, but sometimes you just do. Sometimes your situation warrants there's no room for a sump, you're in a dorm where you're limited in size and space, and you just want to hang some equipment on the back to help keep the water clean between your water changes. Another one that I've got on here. Oh, MTS, multiple tank syndrome. So that happens to a lot of us as we become more and more passionate about the hobby. We decide we want more and more aquariums. And so we call it multiple tank syndrome. And it's actually a real bad thing to have. Because number one, it's expensive. And number two, I just tend to believe that your one tank will do really well while the other ones are not doing well. And then when you really focus on the other ones, your main tank that was doing well is now declining because you're not giving it the amount of attention it deserves. So, I mean, can you do it? Yes. Is it possible? Yes. Is it easy? No. Is it more work? Yes. Does it cost more? Yes. So we want to, find a way to make sure we can handle the load we're giving ourselves, which is one of the reasons, while it'd be kind of cool to set up a new tank and have something to talk about here on the channel, it just sounds like more things to plug in, more things to maintain, more things to repair, more things to clean, and it kind of dissuades me rather quickly. But you know what? At some point, I will decide to add something else. But for now, I'm happy with my 2 tanks here, and I would really like to get the quarantine system reset like I've talked about for so long. It's been on my hit list, but it's not a priority. So it's going to be like one day when I get to it, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to polish the entire front panel of the acrylic and set it up differently with a new sump and some different equipment and make it nice and, well, I mean, it's quiet, but I want to be able to run more flow and still keep it quiet. So I want to change the plumbing. I got a lot of plans. But that is digressing. Let me get back to the topic. Another one that people are really worried about is going to be pests. And when it comes to pests, they have initials for some of them. And like one that's, I think one of the main reasons we use this is because initially we didn't know what they were called. It was an acropore-eating flatworm, so we just did AEFW. And the acropore-eating flatworm wasn't named for many years, and then finally a friend of mine actually did the research, did a paper on it, and got to name it. And it's some crazy long name that if it was in front of me, I could read it to you, but I don't memorize it. I just know it's got a name. And it probably is identified by name on my Critter ID section of my website when you look up the acropore-eating flatworm. But it's a flatworm that blends in exactly with the same color as your acropora. And then when you were to blow off the coral with a turkey baste, or even better with a power head, you would then see them flying off into the water column where a fish can devour it. But they bite the coral and they basically suck the life out of it, and the coral just shuts down. The polyps retract. It's not happy. It could end up being killed by too many of them. And of course, they lay eggs, which makes even more of them, and the babies that are hatching are very hungry, and they continue to devour. So it is one of the pests that we definitely don't want. This is another pest, but it's not an acronym, but I just want to mention it because it's not what it sounds like. There's a thing out there for acropora owners that we don't want in our tanks. They're called red bugs. And the reason that it's not what it sounds like is they don't look red at all. They're like yellow fleas. So when somebody says, oh, you have red bugs, but I'm looking at them and they're yellow, I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, it turns out the yellow flea has a red dot on it. And I don't know why it was called red bugs. I wish they'd called it yellow bugs from the beginning because it makes more sense. But that is one of those things where if you don't know what we're talking about, you may not understand. Just like when someone says, oh, those are black bugs. And I'm always trying to learn more about black bugs. And I have not in person seen any. I've seen some pictures on the internet. But when I was up at the fish store, Frank was saying, hey, this coral is covered in black bugs. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, those aren't even black, they're purple. And they're not bugs, they look like flatworms. And he said, I don't know what they are, but they're killing my corals. And he was really upset, and he ripped all the corals out, and he dipped them all, and he left the tank completely devoid of corals. And again, he called them black bugs, but they're not. And then it was about a year, I discovered these in his tank when I was visiting. I got to see him in person. I filmed a few seconds on camera. And that was like in May. And then it was almost like 9 months later or something like that. I was opening up Coral Magazine, and there in the beginning of the magazine was a short little synopsis about these purple flatworms. Like, oh my God, those are exactly what I saw in Frank's tank. So it'd just be nice if we could identify things by what they're called, where it makes sense. And, like I said, I still want to see black bugs, and eventually I will. I'll come across it, or someone will send me a fantastic picture, and I'd love to see video of it as well. So if you have anything like that and you want to send it my way, you can. And you can email me through my website, and maybe if you have a link or something, or you have you could even have a link to like a Google Images account, and I could see it. That would be great. I'd appreciate that. Because black bugs, I have not encountered myself. But then again, I'm not buying a lot of corals. I tend to just grow stuff I have and let it get bigger and bigger, unless something goes wrong. Also, I did mention the word acropora, which is another one of those weird words that we all know, but the rest of the world does not. And it ties to an acronym called SPS, which stands for Small Polyp Stony Coral. So SPS corals are very popular. They're usually expensive, and they can be very expensive. There's also LPS corals, which are large polyp stony corals, and those are the ones that are going to be bigger around in diameter. They have a big head and some kind of a calcified stalk underneath, or a calcified base. And so we have corals like hammers, Euphyllia, frog spawn, Alveopora. These are all in the LPS family. And then there's also other things like scolies. Those are also in the LPS family. Acans or Micromusa. Those are kind of being used interchangeably. They're trying to get us to change and not say acan anymore, but I have a hard time doing that. And acan is short for Acanthostrea. So let's go to another term that you don't see people use very often, but you see it in articles, and that's NSW. And that stands for natural seawater. So when they're doing a story about corals in Tahiti, they may talk about the water quality of natural seawater in that area, that domain. And natural seawater is a really good way to judge what our corals need if you knew the area. So if you knew what the water parameters were in Fiji, what the water parameters were in Indonesia, what the water parameters were in Tahiti, these different places, and same with Florida, places where we get corals from, then it allows us to decide how to run the water parameters in our own reef tank to give those corals the best life they can have. So we do care about natural seawater, but we tend to focus on ASW, which is artificial seawater, which would be the saltwater mix we make ourselves, where we take RODI water, which is another one, and we mix it with salt to make artificial seawater, or artificial saltwater. And some people are lucky. They're near the ocean, or they're near a place like, for example, in California, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, I believe also the Scripps Institute, provides saltwater to hobbyists if they're willing to drive down there and open the spigot and fill up their jugs, and they can do it for free. Others would go to their local fish store, the LFS, to get saltwater or jugs of RODI water. And the reason they get that is because they can't make it at home. And then others buy an RODI system to make their own water at home and mix it with salt to create ASW. And I also mentioned RODI, so let's go into that one. So RO water is reverse osmosis water. And RO water is a really good starting point. And then, so a lot of people will try and just get an RO system at first. They just think that'll work, that'll do the job, and they know it's better than a pitcher of Brita water, which is true. We don't want to use those types of filtration. We definitely want reverse osmosis. But then a lot of people say, well, I want to go all in. I want RODI, which is going to be reverse osmosis deionized water. And that deionized water is key because it is what removes the absolute last of the specks of stuff in the water that we call TDS, which is total dissolved solids. Aren't we having fun today with the alphabet? I haven't even dipped into the Russian yet. Let's see. Another very common thing that I recommend to people is to have an ATO, which is an automatic top-off system. And I also recommend an ATO reservoir, which would be a container that can hold the RODI water that is going to be added to your tank automatically with an automatic top-off system. So as the water evaporates from the reef tank, the ATO turns on, taking water from the reservoir and replenishing so that the water level never changes in your aquarium, which would then never change the salinity of your tank. So an ATO is very important, and you'll see people use that term all the time. And I know I do it all the time, and I don't know, like I said, I feel like we should have talked about these acronyms a very long time ago. Also, our protein skimmers, their job is to be a body full of bubbles that rises to the top, into the neck, into a collection cup, and it is capturing something called DOCs, D-O-C-S, and that's dissolved organic compounds. And we want to, the reason we're removing DOCs from the water, we're trying to remove pollutants from the water, and what happens is the pollutants stick to the bubbles rise, and all that scum stays near the top, and then eventually bubbles over into the cup, and we can remove the cup, wash it out, and put it back on. And you may have seen something similar when visiting a beach. There may be an area where the rock is just gross, and there's all this slime and sludge built up. That's the docks being slammed against the shore and accumulating there rather than just blowing around in the water nonstop. And it's the same principle with our protein skimmers. A term that I'd say came out about 10 years ago is the ultra-low nutrient system, ULNS, and that would be the desire to have very, very low nitrate and phosphate. Now, the reason I smile about that is because now 10 years later, everyone has ultra-low nutrient systems, and they're trying to add nutrients to avoid the plague like dinoflagellates, cyanobacteria, hair algae, all the issues that arise in our tanks because their nutrients are so crazy low because they use dry rock, dry sand. They won't introduce one speck of life that isn't approved because they're so fearful of pests. And that's a shame. I don't feel like you should be that fearful of pests. Pests are pests. If they happen, they happen. Like, for example, you buy a house, and you're living in the house, and it's awesome, and it's a new house. No one's lived in it before, and you love it. And the walls are painted, the carpet's super soft, the AC works great, and then one day you see a little spider in the corner, or you see some ants near the kitchen counter, or you see some kind of bug outside, and so you call the exterminator, and you tell him, blow up my house, I'm moving. No, of course you don't say that. What you say is, can you please take care of this? I saw them here and there, and I don't want any over there. And the exterminator goes through and sprays stuff down and gets rid of the pests. It's the same thing with our reef tanks. If you have some kind of pest that appears in your tank, you just deal with it and you solve the problem. It's not the end of the world. There are far worse things that will hurt your tank, such as dinoflagellates, compared to acre-eating flatworms or red bugs or montipore-eating nudibranchs or acropora spiders or zoanthid spiders. I mean, there's a lot of little pests, but we see them, we remove them. I understand wanting to avoid the problem, but I think we have gone so far to the extreme that we have we're limiting the bacteria, the beneficial bacteria in your tank. So some will say, well, then just add bacteria, which you can. And there's a lot of different choices on the market, and there's a lot of suggestions from many new hobbyists saying you should use this, or you should use this, or I recommend that. And they could be right, they could be wrong. It could be you're using too much of a bacteria or the wrong kind of bacteria. And the trick is knowing which ones to use, and that's kind of challenging even for me. I mean, even when I'm looking at a product, I'm thinking, do I need this? Does my tank need this? Would it matter? Would it make a difference? Would it cause a problem? So, but that's all part of the ultra-low nutrient system that everyone was trying so hard to get 10 years ago when our numbers were high and we're trying to bring them down. Now everyone's got numbers that are already down from the moment the first drop of water hits the tank, and they need to raise them up, so they're dosing things like nitrate and phosphate and Dr. Tim's Waste Away or Vibrant or whatever they're using in different forms and fashions to add some bacteria to the system. So those are just a few things off the top of my head. There's plenty of other bacteria, including Perdibio, there's Live Rock Enhance, there's Brightwell's Microbacter 7, there's Microbacter 7 Clean. There's a lot of different choices out there. Now, here's one that you don't hear a lot of people say as much as you might think. When people are shopping for a tank, they say, well, I want to set up a really nice reef tank, and I want this size. And then the next question should be, is it reef ready? And reef ready means it's been drilled for an overflow box. And if you aren't getting a reef ready tank, then you're going to have to use hang on back stuff, which is back to HOB. And we're trying to get a reef ready tank because it's so much easier to run. I mean, the bottom line is it's drilled, water must exit, and it's going to exit via gravity. And you don't have to worry about siphon breaking like you would with something that's hang on back. So that's why we want to make sure that we are getting a reef ready tank. And I know that's not an acronym, but it's definitely a term that is used in our reef language. Now, when it comes to measurements in the United States, we use a letter very often that I'm sure people in other countries might think is something else. We use G for gallons. So we might say 500 G. And we are not saying 500 grams, typically. Most people are not. Most times we are using, I have a 100-gallon tank, they put 100 G. I have a 7-gallon tank. I have, and that's just what we do. Some people will write 7 gal, G-A-L. But most of us just do a G at the end, and it's not grams. We also use other measurements, including PPT, which is parts per thousand, ppm, parts per million, ppb, parts per billion. We've got mech per liter. We have DKH. And then there's just the letters from the periodic chart, like K, which stands for potassium. NO3 for nitrate. Oh, is that on the I'm sorry. Might be mixing those up. But nitrate is NO3. NH3 is ammonia. So we have certain, PO4 is for phosphate. We use these different abbreviations to identify the water parameters in our tank, especially when we're asking for help. And that leads me to the worst offense many people do, and I try even myself to avoid doing it, and that is to not use the word fine when describing my tank. You could always, it's okay to say my tank is doing fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when something goes wrong and you say everything is fine, we know that's not true. So you are not allowed to use the word fine in that scenario. We need to know what went wrong. We need to know what you did. We need to know what you didn't do. Like recently, my tank had this big major problem, and everyone said, well, what caused it? And I still haven't put my finger on it. But I knew it wasn't fine. I knew for a fact it wasn't fine. And I had to even call friends and talk to them. And I knew one of the things I had not done in a long time was water changes. And so I thought, could it be that? Like I said, I still haven't put my finger on what caused the problems in my tank. The problems in my tank are not 100% eliminated. I had in the last week, and I've done nothing with a tank. Literally, all the work I did during that 8-9 days was the work I did, and then I left it alone, and it's on autopilot, and everything's automated. And I just make sure there's water for top off. I make sure the skimmer's clean. I check the turf scrubber and scrub it, as needed. But I didn't add any additives. I didn't do anything, and yet I'm in the middle of a hammer coral. I had 3 polyps just vanish, and there's 3 white skeleton heads. But everything around it's completely intact. It's not like the anemone stung the heck out of it and killed 15 heads. There's just a little hole in a healthy colony that I don't understand. And then in the front of my tank was another hammer all by itself on a rock, not near anything, nothing with sweepers that could sting it, and it went up in smoke a few days ago. And then at the top of my reef, in that area of all the clusters of hard corals, the SPS corals, the milka started to RTN a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what's causing it, and it didn't. It's not widespread. It's not just keep going. It just took out a couple of branches, and it could again be just residual after effect of what happened in the first place. It just never quite finished. But it's not a nightmare of epic proportions. I still have a monster amount of corals in my tank, and I'm just looking at one little white spot, and it's irritating me when I should be focused on all the beauty of everything that's doing really well. But I just want to encourage you guys, when you have a problem in your tank and you're talking in Club Meals Reef, or you're talking here on YouTube, or you're anywhere, you just avoid the word fine when it's not true. Because and they're going to say, what are your parameters? They're fine. See, that's not an answer. And there's a meme that goes around where it shows the API test kits with all the colors, and under every color says fine. And it's a joke, but we need to know exactly what your parameters are. And that leads into measurements. So when we ask for water measurements in this hobby, we want very specific ones, and we want a lot of them. we don't want to just know your salinity and your temperature. You know, those are the absolute least basic numbers we care about. I mean, they matter, but you're going to always see people say, what's your alkalinity, your magnesium, your calcium, phosphates, nitrates, ammonia. They might ask for potassium. They might say if you're dosing trace elements, are you using amino acids? And they hit you with all these things. You're like, oh, I don't even have test kits for that. And then they say, well, you need to get those test kits too. So that's all part of the crazy language of what we do in this hobby. And then you will see things that happen from time to time in conversations. This one I haven't seen in a long time, not since the days of Reef Central, where you would have a post and people would answer your questions and you felt like this person was giving some really good advice, and that person usually would say, you know, you should do this, this, and this, YMMV. And that stood for your mileage may vary. And it's just a terminology from driving a car and how, you know, how much gas mileage you get. But they're just saying, you know, basically what I'm giving you for advice should work, but it may not work exactly as well as it did for me. So your mileage may vary. That's one that I saw quite a bit, especially in the chemistry forum. And it made sense. And then when you have a conversation that's really, let's just call it a hot topic, it's being debated, you'll see people put in IMHO, which means in my humble opinion, and they would state what they had to say. And typically a person that's saying in my humble opinion tries to say it in a nice, steady manner. They're not being aggressive, they're not name-calling, they're not attacking. They're just saying, I believe this is the situation. And so they're trying to assist you with that. And then finally, they might even end up with an HTH, which stands for Hope That Helps. And that is something that I've used a lot. So when people ask me a question, I try to give them the advice I can based on the information they've given me, based on my own personal experience of what I've been able to accomplish. I hope that what I'm suggesting helps them. But you know, there's no absolute guarantee it's going to work out. It may not work out at all. And so I try to let them know, you know, this could happen, or it may work out exactly as we want. Hope that helps, HTH. And then there's going to be specific acronyms such as Fowler, FOLWR, which just means fish only with live rock. FOWLR, I said it wrong. FOWLR is going to be fish only with live rock, and those systems are going to be normally some really nice fish, but there's no cleanup crew in there whatsoever because the fish typically will eat the crew. So it's going to be a little bit more manual labor for the homeowner or the hobbyist keeping these fish, and they're probably going to be feeding them live foods, large foods, messy foods. This could be puffers, this could be big angelfish, it could be lionfish, it could be eels. These are all things that may happen. I mentioned cleanup crews, so I've got to mention CUC, which is clean up crew. And a CUC is probably the biggest problem we have with new hobbyists. They never get enough cleanup crew. And someone asked me in the Reef timeline recently, when is the right time to add phytoplankton? I saw their comment, I haven't replied yet. They said, when would be the right time to add pods, and when's the right time to add phytoplankton to a new setup somewhere in the Reef timeline? Like, is it month 1? Is it month 3? When is it time to put that in? And it's the same thing with the cleanup crew. You don't want to put them in too soon because there's nothing for them to eat, and they will starve to death. So, and then they die, and when they die, they add nitrate and phosphate to the water, which is counterintuitive to what you're trying to do, because that could then lead to the algae problems. But we definitely want to have a cleanup crew that matches the volume of the tank, and then as you grow more and more algae, because that's what algae does, it grows under ideal conditions with good light, which we provide, you're going to need more cleanup crew. And most people that say, oh, I've got this tank full of algae, and they show it, and it's end-to-end algae, and you can tell it's just been like this for months. This didn't happen overnight. Never happens overnight. Those people typically used to have a cleanup crew, or never got a big enough cleanup crew, or got the wrong cleanup crew. So a CUC is something very often recommended. I have an article, melosreef.com/CUC is a list of different critters that I suggest someone should have in their tank to fight algae problems. And I recently posted a picture of my nitrates. And somebody said, man, with your nitrates, I can't believe your tank isn't full of hair algae. And I mean, if anyone were to come over and study my tank closely, it's not perfect, but there's no hair algae. There's little specks of bubble algae here and there. There's little specks of red. There's little specks of this. I mean, right now, because of what happened in the tank, my sand bed gets this ugly patch in the anemone cube behind me here. And then every night it fades. Like cyano, but it's not cyano. And it's just, the tank just has to burn through that and get rid of it. But no, a little bit of nitrate isn't going to grow hair algae in your tank. Nitrate definitely is a fuel. It can definitely, it can help it, but the phosphate is the big one. And when you have a tank full of algae and you test your phosphates and they're 0, you know that the phosphate measurement is inaccurate, because clearly you've got a tank full of it for this algae to exist. So, for example, if you have a tank that has a bunch of hair algae, rip out a whole bunch. Just manually reach in there with your hand and rip off, and keep rinsing your hand in a bowl of water, put your hand in, grab another handful, and just keep going. 20 minutes later, measure your phosphates. I guarantee you they're not going to measure 0 now, because you've released it into the water column. The fouler tanks, the fishermen with live rock, led me to a couple of fish we use initials for. Not a lot of fish get initials, but CBB is one, which is the copper band butterfly fish. And then the PBT, which is the powder blue tang. Those two get acronyms all the time, but you don't see acronyms for most of the other tangs. You don't see people saying, that the hippo tang is HT, for example, which is also a regal tang. It's not RT. No, they just call it a hippo, a regal, a blue tang. They call it something. But the powder blue tang is always PBT. And then I talked about that. I think I talked about that one. I talked about that. LEDs, we all know what LEDs are, but they stand for light emitting diodes. But we all just think LEDs, and when you talk about buying bulbs, you talk about buying fixtures, we're looking for LEDs. So that's not a big deal. Softies, we're near the end of my list, by the way. Softies can lead into a lot of different corals that are soft in nature. But one of the ones that was kind of a pet peeve with some people was that they'd say, I have a bunch of zoos in my tank, Z-O-O-S, and it's zoas, so Z-O-A-S. And that was one that, like I said, it bothered some people. For me, I just knew what they were talking about. I knew if they said zoos or they said zoas, they were talking about zoanthids. But it's nice if you can use zoas, so that would be a recommendation. And then, as you know, recently my tank went through something called an RTN event, which is rapid tissue necrosis. The slower version of that scenario is STN, which typically starts from the bottom of the coral and works its way up, which is slow tissue necrosis. And then finally, I'm sure you've already seen this many times, but there is a term on many websites that sell corals called WYSIWYG, which stands for what you see is what you get. And the idea is that the picture of the exact item you're looking at is going to be put in a box and shipped to you. That's the one, and not a representation thereof. So for example, quick story, back in the day, I had a little tiny Maxima clam. It was really small. So I made a cute little acrylic tray with a bracket that came up, and I would set the tray, and I put sand inside the little tray, and I put the clam in there. And I did a suspension thing where it hung down inside the aquarium. So if you can imagine the aquarium in front of me, and the water's to the top of the screen here. And then I had this little tray hanging about this high up under the metal halide light, and the clam was getting light. And then every night when I would feed it, I would lift the bracket up to where it was above the surface of the water, so it's actually there. And I would put phytoplankton in the little bowl, in the little container I'd made, and after about 30 minutes, the water was clear because the phytoplankton had been absorbed by the clam, and then I lowered it back into the tank for the next 24 hours. And that was my nightly routine, was give that little clam a little bit of phytoplankton, and no one could get it, and it worked out fine. However, one guy took my picture and used it to sell a clam on eBay. And I was like, dude, that's not even your clam. See, WYSIWYG should mean what you see is what you get, not some version of my clam that looks sort of like it that is in this guy's tank. I said, take your own picture, put it on your own eBay ad, and sell it. I'm not, I can't believe you stole my picture. But that's in the old days. It's just one of those things that popped into my head. We've seen a lot of craziness. So let me see if you guys talked about any acronyms that I forgot about. And I will be glad to start answering some of these questions for a few minutes, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Remember, if you ask a question, do @MeLovesReef. That would be very helpful for me to find what you have to say. Odile says, I have cotton candy hair algae. How do I get rid of it? That would be used the large Mexican turbo snails. They are the one snail that devours cotton candy algae, hair algae. Hey, Jake, thanks very much for the compliment. I appreciate that. He said, first time watching you live. I watch you every Sunday while testing my water. I've learned a lot from you over the years. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Yep, did that one. Yep, did that one. Mr. Reef Buster, you get to be shared on the screen for that one. I went to my LFS for some frags of LPS and SPS, but their SPS had RTN and STN, so I only got LPS and some RBTA instead. Very nice. Good job. Let's see. Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't seen this one, but maybe it's new. Maybe it's been around a while. But NSA is what Rob is suggesting is negative space aquascape. And we definitely do want to set up our aquascape in a way where it's not just wall-to-wall rock. And it's nice to have some areas where there's nothing. So it draws your eye to the something, and it takes away all the distractions. And having some negative space in there is good. I hadn't seen the acronym, though, so that's cool. Could be new to me. Maybe everyone else knew it and I didn't. Wow, Vanmo found a very old acronym of mine from back in the day, from my first podcast, PBITAWA. And that was an old joke. That was pour bleach in tank and walk away. And we were talking about, I was meaner back then. We were talking about people that just had no business having an aquarium and should just walk away, just stop. And I was joking, but unfortunately, over a period of years, we saw people actually harming livestock by throwing bleach in aquariums. It was terrible. It had nothing to do with my joke. I mean, it was just a weird coincidence that it started happening. And like there was stories that a fish store would have some random person come in that would destroy like their best system, and escape. And they'd be showing video footage and like, can you help me identify this person? And some of those stories led to it was an employee from another store that was sabotaging this store. I'm like, wow, I can't even imagine. Terrible stuff. Macy's Daddy says, do you measure ORP? And if so, do you do anything to manage it? I do measure it. My Apex measures it all the time. And it's just kind of one of those numbers that lets me see where I'm at. But I don't do anything with it specifically. If I was dosing ozone to my system, I would be looking at it much more closely. Poseidon's Reef says, I'm currently cycling my tank. My nitrite is dark purple. It's above 5 ppm. Will this stall my cycle? If so, how do I fix it? No, it shouldn't stall it. I mean, it's just a weird spike. Just ride it out. Don't run a protein skimmer. Don't run the lights. Don't run any carbon. Just let this thing ride itself out. I mean, a cycle typically runs about 3 weeks from beginning to end. I don't know how far into the cycle you are, but the normal thing is ammonia spikes and comes down, nitrite spikes and comes down, and then nitrate goes up and then it comes down. And hopefully that will happen. You'll have to give me more facts for me to give you more of an answer. I'm looking for the next question. Paul Biggs says, what's the best way to deal with vermitid snails if you can't reach them all? I keep hearing bumblebee snails are the solution. So if you get some and they work, I want you to tell me that it worked for you. But I've seen so many people say it, I think it's probably overwhelmingly true. I remember when we found those years ago, I thought they were pretty, but that's as far as it went for me. I mean, I might have put some in my tank for fun, but I didn't put them in there to do anything. But I love that there is a solution to almost every pest out there. There's always something that eats something. It's just the trick of knowing what that thing is. Oh, here's another good one that I didn't even think of. So Jamie says it would be cool if more people did ICP tests on natural seawater from different areas and could add the results to a database so we know exactly what the corals live in and maybe add it to an area on reef trace. Okay, so the reason I want to thank you for that, Jamie, is because ICP is something that is an acronym we see a lot. It's a type of measuring the water for its exact elements contained within. And there are many companies out there, maybe 4 or 5 companies that do ICP testing right now. And because it's not in front of me, I can't tell you what the acronym stands for by heart because it's one of those things that I read it, I learned it, I forgot it. So, but I have the Coral Magazine on that topic that I've been wanting, and I lost my issue, and Coral Magazine sent me another one so I can finally read my articles about ICP testing because I'm very interested to read the results of their big poll that they did where they asked a lot of people that have used ICP testing for feedback. And while Jamie was suggesting that we use the water measurements from different parts of the world to build kind of a cool database, I love that idea too. I think that's a great idea. And my last trip to Bonaire, I was down at 80 feet with a plastic bottle and I captured some water, brought it home in my suitcase, and then I sent it off for an ICP test and got the results and put those on my website in the blog section. But next time I will actually take the ICP vial with me instead because trying to take a 20-ounce bottle of water on an airplane, I was a little worried they might take it away or confiscate it or wonder what I'm up to. I mean, it wasn't full, but it was still, and then it could have leaked where those little things are made for shipping, so that should have been fine in my suitcase. But ICP testing is another one of those initials you'll see people talk about, and it's a way to measure things we don't normally measure. It doesn't measure everything we normally measure, it adds other things, so it can help you find out if there's too much of anything in your tank that shouldn't be, like aluminum, for example, or I don't know. It's just nice to have some information, some additional information to help. Like in my situation, I should have done it. I never got around to it. I'd just been too busy. I should have grabbed a sample out of my tank and shipped it off immediately after the RTN event to see if there's anything specifically in the water. And since I had stuff happening just last week, and it was just a little bit here and there, it still made me think I should still do this. And I said, 3 days ago, I'm going to mail it. And of course, I never got it done. So guess I'll do it on Monday. I'd like to anyway. It's time. Regis says, is it necessary to cure new dry rock before introducing it to the aquarium, and for how long if it's necessary? Thanks. It's really best if you could. If you'll take the brand new rock and you put it in a barrel of salt water and some circulation, and then give it a week or two and just measure what's coming off the rock, you might discover that the phosphates are kind of high. It's possible. So it's nicer if you can to take that rock and cure it in salt water with a lot of flow and change the water once a week. And that way you've got this nice cured rock. You can even use live rock enhance to kind of prepare it because live rock enhance will eat away anything that might exist, which shouldn't. I mean, it's dry rock, should have nothing on it. But it'll also seed it with bacteria, which is a big perk. And I haven't had to do it because Live Rock Enhance came out way beyond after any time I've had any dry rock on hand. But like if I were to reset the frag tank and I was going to use dry rock, which I don't think I plan to put any rock in there. I have some rock and I kind of want to put it in the back or I want to put it in the sump, but I want to have room in the front to actually take corals on my reef and put them in the frag tank. So I don't see myself doing it, but I know specifically it's designed for curing live rock. Also, there's a product called from Brightwell that I sell that is a dry rock starter kit that will actually take you through the cycle and provide the rock with the bacteria you need to. So those are a couple of methods. But if you have the time or if you already have the rock, you don't have the tank yet, you can definitely go ahead and put it in salt water with circulation in a big trash can. Just a nice, clean, brand new, scrubbed, clean trash can. Fill it up with salt water, put it in the rock, put it in a giant pump like a mag pump, and just let it idle, just let it circulate. And like I said, once a week, change the water. And then when you're ready to set up your tank, you can take it out of the barrel and you can actually glue it together with the to make structures and shapes you like and put it back in there as solid pieces once it's cured. And again, it's just kind of helping move things along a little bit in that regard. I like to always keep, I don't have any live rock extra right now, but if I did, it would be in a barrel of salt water at all times. And historically, I always had a barrel full of, or at least half full of live rock, and I ended up using it all on the 400 gallon, and that's why I have none left. Nick says, I'm trying to catch hitchhiker crabs from my live rock. And he says, I've tried the baited glass without luck so far. Any ideas? I would still use a live rock over dry rock for the benefits that outweigh the pests. Yes. If you have a crab that lives in a rock, one method is to take the rock out of the tank really quickly and maybe pour in some carbonated water into the hole, and that crab will come bursting out of the hole because they don't like carbonated water. That is one method that works. Then you can put the rock right back in your tank. The other one is the baited glass. You might have to just try it a few times until you finally get the guy. I mean, eventually it's going to go in there. So what he's talking about is you take a glass and you put it at basically a 45-degree angle where he's leaning against the rock, and you put some food in the bottom. And you usually do this at night. You know, the fish have gone to sleep, and you set the jar in there. And what will happen is the crab or the hermit crabs will walk up the side, and it'll go down. It'll slide down the glass right down to the food, but then it can't get out the glass because it's too smooth. And that is a method to remove crabs out of an aquarium. That comes to mind. I mean, like I said, mine is usually figure out which rock they live in, remove the rock. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to wait it out. I would just keep sticking with the glass thing, I think. Or maybe you can get lucky and you'll see it out and be able to snag it out of the tank with something. Maybe you could block it from running another direction with a net. Maybe you could use forceps to grab it. I don't know. That's going to be a little tricky. I was trying to think of some kind of natural predator. Depends what kind of crab you're trying to get rid of too, because there are wrasses that eat crabs, but they'll eat the hermit crabs too. So you don't want to put in anything that's going to be that destructive because it'll start destroying everything else you care about. Reef and Dive says my tank is 2 years old. It's a 65 gallon. I have recurring zero nitrate, and I'm raising the phosphate up to 0.2 until GFO. Do you have any hint for changing my nitrate to phosphate balance? If you absolutely cannot get the nitrates up, then I would suggest that you dose nitrate. And I sell something called Neo Nitro that raises nitrate. I sell a product called Neophos that adds phosphate to the water. So if you need either of those, I have those in stock. If you live in another country, like I feel you might, then you may be able to get it in your area from another vendor. But there are people that do that. And then there's people that have used products, like tree stump remover to dose their tanks. I thought, well, let me get something made for the aquarium hobby. So while I don't deal with nitrate and phosphate issues, I decided to get the product for my customers that are dealing with these tanks that are so pristine that they have none, so they can dose some. But it would have been so much easier to just bottle up the water out of my reef and send that to them. Let's see. A lot of you said, I caught a live stream. This is the same time every week. We're not doing anything different today. The spiritual counselor says, hey Mark, you gave me a tip last stream to test my alkalinity in my water storage tank because my levels in my tank were suddenly super low. Sure enough, this was the problem. And he says I'm awesome. I'm really glad it helped you. It's one of those things that once you know it, you know to watch out for it. And that's why I try to share those tidbits on these streams, because we want to definitely make sure everything matches when we're changing water. That way you can change water without fear of doing harm to your tank. When you think about it, I mean, we either we make our own salt water or we buy salt water from someone else. Just because it's salt water doesn't negate the need to test it to verify what's in the jug. And so while it's nice to say, well, my fish store never makes a mistake, they can make a mistake. It's possible. Just because you went there to buy salt water and they filled the jug right in front of you doesn't mean it was mixed completely correctly. They could have forgotten it. They might have got a call. They may not have put in as much as they thought. They might have put in too much. Someone might have added top off water, to refill the container higher and never got around to adding salt. I mean, so many things can go wrong. Plus, the jugs we haul water around in may not be as clean as they should be. You're supposed to clean those from time to time with bleach water to make sure they're nice and pristine, so that way they don't add basically TDS and pollute the brand new water you're paying money for. But anyway, even if you're making water at home, same rule, clean your container, and then mix it up and then test it. And we want to test alkalinity. It'd be good to test magnesium and calcium as well. We want to check temperature and salinity. But I'm not saying you have to check calcium, magnesium every single time. That's something you want to do anytime you open up a new barrel, a new bag, a new box of salt, and then every bit of that salt you use for the rest of the container should be the same. I mean, there's a possibility through settling, and what they're talking about is the barrels, the boxes, the buckets are on the back of semi-trucks driving across the nation to be delivered to all these different fish stores. And the bucket is vibrating, and so the stuff could be settling, and there, in theory, could be more alkalinity at the bottom and less at the top of the barrel. So some hobbyists would take their barrel of salt and roll it around in the yard, or they try to stir it with a big paddle or a stick or something like that. It just depends on what you're using. But like, for example, if I got a brand new 5-gallon or 6-gallon barrel of bucket of salt, I would open it up, I'd pour it into my small bucket, I'd mix it with salt water, I'd measure it, and then I knew these were my levels, and then I could assume pretty much the rest of that barrel, I keep saying barrel, that bucket is the same number when it comes to alkaline, calcium, and magnesium. But, I buy a barrel now, which makes 1,000 gallons of salt water. And I just measure. When I make a big batch of salt water, I just take a sample and I measure everything. And it's just better, it's just safer, it's smarter. And that way you don't have to wonder, you don't have to guess, you don't have to assume, you just know. And alkalinity is the one thing that seems to deplete as the salt water sits in circulation. So if you have it mixing for a few hours, it's probably going to stay the same. If you're going to have it mixed for a few days, it's probably going to go down. If you have it going for weeks like I do, or months like I do, then it will go down quite a bit. I mean, it's not going to go down to 0. It might have been 8 initially, and now it's measuring 6. So I buffer it back up with soda ash mixed in water, pour that in, wait 20 minutes, measure again. Alkalinity is right back where it belongs, and I can go ahead and do the water change that night or the next morning. So it's a very convenient way to do things. But if you're not knowing to check it, it can affect your tank, like he said. Marine Life says, are there any critters that can eat green turf algae that I can't get rid of? The only thing that I can think of specifically would be a foxface, which isn't a critter, it's fish. And then the lettuce nudibranch likes to eat bryopsis, and bryopsis is a green turf algae. It's a very coarse algae. The other thing you need to do, besides any kind of a predator, is for you to get in there with a power head, because it's easier than anything else, and just blast that area to knock all the detritus out of the turf. So that way the turf algae is starving of nutrients because you took them away. So it traps detritus, it actually makes its own little deep sand bed, so to speak, and it feeds off of that to grow and thrive. And by stripping it away, by blowing it with a power head every single week and knocking the stuff loose so that the protein skimmer can remove it and getting it out and away from the plant will weaken. And then, like I said, the critters, they can help devour it. Also, there was a product from Kent called Kent Tech M that was some magical elixir. We didn't know what was in it. It's supposed to be magnesium, but apparently it had something else. And it would kill bryopsis. But Kent doesn't make it that way anymore. So now I believe Brightwell sells a version of it, or Continuum sells a version of it, because the owner from Kent started a new company and is partners with Brightwell. So the recipe moved. So both of those companies probably have a bottle designed specifically to get rid of turf algae. You might look into that as well. But normally it comes down to ripping it out by hand, adding a cleanup crew. Hermit crabs will work on algae. Emerald crabs can work on algae. That's why they have the pinchers they have. And then the lettuce nudibranchs can help, but they're very fluffy. They float away. You have to keep putting them back where you need them. It's kind of a pain. That's cool. TMRV Style says, your live streams made me pay for YouTube so I can close the screen and listen while building stuff in the garage now. That's pretty cool. I've noticed that when you, if you want to just listen to something and you put your phone in your pocket with the screen off, you'll just lose your signal. So paying for it solves that. That's a good workaround. Ah, thank you. Brian says ICP stands for inductively coupled plasma. Wow, that sounds exciting. And Lamont, thank you very much for the super chat. I really appreciate that. I'm going to use it to feed Spock. Kaustuv, I hope I said that right, says, hello from Denmark. He wants to say hi. He's a big fan. He says, you're such an inspiration for all of us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I'm happy that my knowledge is helping you and that you want to tune in and listen, because I realize there's a lot of options out there, and I just do the best I can to provide something that, if I can help you guys avoid a mistake I made, even better. And I've 23 years in this hobby, I've made a bunch of different mistakes over the years. And I've learned from them myself, and I tell myself, I'll never make that mistake again. And then you find some new mistake to make, and you're just like, oh, I'll never make that mistake again. And it kind of just keeps going like that. Let's see. Oh, this is so difficult. Daryl, I don't have an answer for you. He says, how would you attack a fouler system that's being taken over with cyano and green hair algae? I have both high nitrate and phosphates. I'm trying to combat them. Well, I mean, you could definitely knock down the phosphate with phosphate RX. That shouldn't be an issue for your fish-only system. You may need to buffer up alkalinity 20 minutes before you use phosphate RX, but you can just knock down the phosphates, which will then starve out the green hair algae. It'll weaken it. Doesn't remove it, weakens it. The cyano, of course, you can just use red cyano RX or ChemiClean. Either of those two products will definitely remove it from the tank. But the hair algae problem is a problem. It's just, if you can't have critters in there that are going to remove it because the fish eat the critters, then you are the cleanup crew and you have to do it. And that just is what it is. I mean, let's look at it this way. When I was a kid, my dad had his saltwater tank. He had these big dead skeletons in the tank, and they were white. And they added some decor basically, and then they got hideous. And we would blast some of the garden hose. We'd leave them in the sun. I don't know what else we did. Maybe we dipped them in bleach or something. And once they were nice and white, we put them back in the tank. We were the cleanup crew. You didn't hear anyone saying, "Oh, you need snails and hermit crabs to take care of that." That wasn't even a thing back then. So I would say that sometimes it's going to be all hands on deck, and it's going to be out of effort. I remember one time I was in a guy's house. It was somewhere up north. I feel like it was up in Ohio, and it was winter, and it was snow everywhere. It was so beautiful. And he said, well, we got to stop by my house. And I was like, okay, cool. But we went there early in the morning. It was going to be, I think I went there for a speaking engagement. And while I was there, we were going to, I arrived the night before. We grabbed dinner. I stayed in a hotel. And then the next morning, they picked me up. And we're supposed to go to the venue where this event is going to happen. Maybe it was just speaking. Maybe it was a frag swap type thing with a speaker. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember we were in his house early in the morning, and I walked into his kitchen, and there was this big quarter-round aquarium in the corner of the kitchen near the table, but the lights were off. So I'm trying to peer into this tank to see what's in there, but I can't see anything because it's too early. Tank's dark. And he said, well, I got to get this and that and the other. And I looked at him. I said, does this house have a basement? And he's like, yeah. And then he got on the phone. I was like, I'm going to go look at your basement because I am just obsessed with basements. I think they're so cool. My grandparents had basements. I loved it. And I've never been in a house with a basement. I lived in California. I've lived here in Texas. And we don't have basements. So I went to this guy's basement. And when I got down there, there was all this aquarium stuff. And they were running. And there was lights on. And I'm looking, and the tank is just, you can't see through the glass. It's filthy. And, I try to look through, and it's just so much hair algae. So he's upstairs on the phone. He's packing things in his truck. And I thought, well, I'm going to be helpful. And I went looking around in the basement. And I found a bowl or a little small bucket or a little container. Maybe it was like a Ziploc container. And I found this little thing, and I just got on top of the tank on a little step ladder, and I started pulling algae out and putting it in the container. And some people were like, where's Mark? And, they figured out he's in the basement. And people came downstairs, and they saw what I was doing. What are you doing? I was like, wow, I just thought I'd help out. And they were like, huh. And it ended up that like 4 or 5 of us all started pulling algae out of this tank. And then the guy came downstairs, the guy that owns the house. He's like, what are y'all doing? I said, I don't know. We were just, trying to be helpful. And he's like, I am so embarrassed. You weren't supposed to see any of this. And I was like, yeah, I know. It's no big deal. And it actually was fun. And so, we spent like whatever it was, 25 minutes. We were all just laughing and talking and ripping hair algae out of this tank, or tanks. And we removed a whole bunch. It looked a lot, but you could start seeing corals and start like, hey, look, there's stuff in here. It was fun. And then we had to, leave for the event. But it made me think, wouldn't it be cool, and it's never happened, but wouldn't it be cool if there was this reef repair crew of like 6 people that would just come in and just attack your tank for a few hours from the bottom to the top and just clean everything up, like just rescue my tank crew. And they go in and they just attack it and get it closer to where it should be. They test all the water, they rip out all the bad stuff, they remove all the dead stuff, they change some water, they make sure all the equipment's running properly, and they get out of there. And it gives the hobbyist kind of a jump start toward progress, so they aren't so frustrated with with so much they have to do. Because that's the thing. The longer you ignore the problem, the worse the problem gets. And the more it compounds, the less you want to do it. And then you're thinking, well, if I do this, I got to do this one and this one. And I can't ignore that one. And so, oh my God, there's so much to do. I'll do this later. Or I'll do this next week. Or I'm not doing it. You could be that attitude too. So the challenge is to overcome that. So that's why I always suggest to you guys, test your water every week. Because if you aren't measuring your water and knowing where things are, it will get away from you. And then it'll start to snowball. And then you're playing catch up, which is so much harder. It's so much better, like comparing it to, Titanic and the iceberg. It's so much better to steer away from the iceberg than it is to try and fix the side of the ship after you've hit. So, we want to test our water every single week. That's why I always talk about water test Saturday. And we take out our test kits, and we measure our water, make sure everything's good. And, if we have to make any adjustments, we know what to adjust. If we need to dose anything, we can dose it right then and there and correct that one deficiency so that the tank continues to sail along smoothly, and, go back to my boat analogy. And if we can do that, we will avoid the problems. But if we don't test, and if we don't clean our skimmer, and if we ignore our return pump, and we don't check that our heaters work, then when things start falling apart, it all starts falling apart and gets really, really bad, and then it becomes overwhelming. So that's why I kind of like the idea of the reef rescue idea. Hey, Malcolm, thank you very much for the banana fund. I appreciate that. I saw something come up, but I wasn't positive because it didn't come through the normal way. So thank you. I didn't want to ignore you. Our seller says, if you could rebuild your sump, would you change anything? Any must-haves or plumbing changes too? Okay, so last year I did redo my sump, and that is now my perfect sump. And I love it. There's nothing I would redo on it because it's exactly what I wanted. And I did a video about it, so you guys can watch that one. If you haven't seen it yet, you can rewatch it, or watch it, or rewatch it. But there's a spot where the refugium light sits, and I would love to create like a black polycarbonate type thing, like sleeve or lid, or it has to be very customized, and so I never get around to it. But I'd like to trap the light into the refugium completely with a nice custom-made acrylic thing. And I haven't done it. One day I spent, I don't know, 25 minutes trying to figure out the dimensions to create this insanely complicated, silly little add-on. I never did it. But, at some point I'd like to, because it would keep the light from shining on the back of the skimmer, the back of the calcium reactor, onto the plumbing, onto the Clarisea. It would be good to shield all that, and I haven't done it. But that's not the sump. That's again dealing with light control from a refugium light, which is why in the past I just used a sheet of foam that couldn't be ruined by salt water, and it created shade. But I'd like to make something a little fancier, and so here we are. A year later, I still haven't done it. DWA says, do you have any suggestions about getting rid of small feather dusters that are between my zoas, causing the surrounding polyps to close? Feather dusters actually pull off really easily. Those little ones, they have soft little brown tubes normally. It could be the harder ones, the calcified tubes with the red feather dusters. Those are different. But I'm thinking you're talking about the soft ones, that they're almost like paper feather dusters. They just peel right off. And you should be able to just pull them out very easily. You could use forceps. You could use tweezers. You could even use a very soft toothbrush to brush between the polyps if necessary to remove what's worrying you. Even toothpicks, just get in there and kind of clean out the little bit that's bothering you. They don't come back abundantly. If you're trying to have something that just devours them, it would have to be some kind of a feather dust, a butterfly fish, like a copperband butterfly fish, a long-nosed butterfly fish, but they tend to eat other things that you might care about. So that could be problematic. So in that scenario, I'd say you should just handle it yourself. It just depends how many you have and how many zoas you have and what you're trying to accomplish. But if you're in Club Mueller's Reef, I'd like to see a picture of what you got going on so I could see how difficult it is. Scratchy Chan says, how's your algae scrubber doing? Seems to be doing quite well. I opened it up 2 days ago. I haven't looked at it yet today, and it's got a lot of green in there. It's got a little hints of red, which I wish it would stop doing because Jason keeps sending me pictures of his, and it's just green hair. It's perfect. I want mine to look like that, and it doesn't do it. But it's getting there. David Long says, how are your nitrates? Are you finished with no pox? Have you thought about vacuuming your sand bed a little at a time? Yes, so nitrates are at 30. I stopped no pox a year ago at least. And I want to siphon the sand bed. That was my next choice. And that's the thing. I talked about earlier in the stream how I lost three different spots of coral just went up in smoke for no reason. And I would have totally expected that to happen if I'd been in there sand bed vacuuming. If I'd been in there messing with the system and lifting things off the sand, vacuuming, putting the corals back down, just kind of doing a house cleaning, I would expect to have some corals get upset and possibly even give up and go poof. But I didn't do it yet. And I had those couple of corals die, and I thought, man, now do I want to touch the sand bed? I don't want to bother anything. I just want to let the tank, recover. So I haven't done it yet, but it's definitely on my list. I've got 250 gallons of salt water ready to go. And I've got the gravel vac to do the job, and it's just a matter of me removing anything that's on the sand bed that's in my way, and then start vacuuming and working my way around. I can't do all the sand, but I can do the perimeter, and I can do the anemone cube as well. And I want to do that, but I don't want to cause problems when the corals are not 100%. So it's kind of an internal debate: should I do it now or not? So I'm almost more tempted to just do another big water change and leave it alone, because I'm not seeing the numbers just like creeping up again. They went down and they stayed down. D-Dot says, I'm just doing my plumbing now on a new 135 gallon with dual overflows. Any tips? Where do I start? Man, well, on my website, if you go to My Tanks and then you go to the 400 gallon, you can see links to step-by-step all the plumbing I did in my tank, in case that gives you some inspiration or some ideas. Also, in the sump video from last summer, when I changed out my sump, I replaced a lot of plumbing. You could check that out as well and see if there's anything there that helps you. I really do like the Herbie drain system, and I did that with a couple of gate valves. I have a couple of emergency valves because my tank had 4 drain holes in the overflow box. So I was able to do that, and I would suggest if you want a quiet system, you want to mimic something along those lines, and maybe what you see on mine will make sense to you and be worth doing. Also, you said any tips. Like I said, there's like 15 things in my head, but I was going to say let the glue really cure for a long time before you run water through it. I would even suggest using unions where you could take sections that you've put together and take it outside, run a garden hose through it, and then bring it back in and tighten the unions, and now it's done, and you know it's safe to use. These are some thoughts. Always use the primer and the solvent to glue your pipes together. Push your pipe and fitting together, press and hold, twist slightly, wait 30 seconds, maybe even a minute before you go to the next fitting. It's stuff like that. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. I have a Plumbing 101 article on Reef Addicts you could check out. It's about 7 pages long. Has a lot of good information there too. So these are just some thoughts in my head. Reef Eco says, I'm DIYing a calcium reactor, trying to oversize it a bit to make it future-proof. Is it possible to make it too big? I guess. I mean, in theory, it's just a big gizmo filled with media. And then based on how you melt the media will determine how much effluent is being provided to the tank. So it's sort of like my CO2 tank. I had a little tiny adorable CO2 tank. I had it forever. And then I bought a few more so I could just swap them out as they got empty. And then I guess it was earlier this year, I got a huge CO2 tank that should last me a year or longer. I don't need that much CO2, but now I don't have to change it as frequently. So I would think if you make your calcium reactor bigger, you don't have to deal with refilling it with media as frequently. But there is the chance if something goes wrong and you accidentally melt the media because something gets away from you, it might cost you a lot in replacement media. Because, like, for example, Reborn has been really hard to get. And that's the media that a lot of us like for our calcium reactors. And if you accidentally melted it down into sludge, you have to throw all of that away. It's completely useless. And now you got to get a new batch and refill your reactor. So I guess there is a chance that would be a bad thing. But I understand the desire to have it large enough to handle your tank and a potential tank in the future. I don't think just because it's big and has a lot of media that's going to hurt your tank. Because you are dictating how much effluent comes out. You're dictating the pH level in the reactor. You're basing everything on what the tank needs. So, yeah, should be okay if you have the space for it. And then Courtney asks, what's your go-to calcium reactor media since Reborn is still unavailable? Actually, I placed an order with 2 little fishies for the shop recently. And I said to them, do you have any Reborn in stock? Or when will you have it? And she said, it's in stock. I was like, done. I want this, and I want all these things. And I sent in my order, and then a few days later, I got an email saying your order has shipped, and it showed everything I ordered except the media. I'm like, I was told it was in stock. So I wrote back and said, you said it was in stock, so when is it going to happen? And I didn't get a reply at all, so I'm going to have to wait it out. But if you absolutely could not get it, the ARM by Carib Sea has been around forever. It stands for aragonite reactor media, and that is what we used. So I mean, you can use that again, and it's fine to use. I just like Reborn, and I'd like to continue with it. And as soon as it comes back in, it'll be fine. It'll be in my reactor and working. For now, my reactor is around 60% full, and I have a bag of media still on hand for my reef tank. Reefer Vape says, I'm having a problem with red algae that looks and feels like velvet fabric. I can't get rid of it. Anything you recommend that I can use? My tank is 4 months old. Thank you. You're probably dealing with red cyanobacteria, and the solution is going to be red cyano-RX. And it's on my website, and my website even shows you how to dose it exactly to get rid of the red cyano on the bottom of your tank. And once it's gone, it's gone. And it's a solution that happens in 3 to 5 days. So it's what I would do if I had it in my tank, and I would recommend it to anyone. I've been recommending ChemiClean or Red Cyano-RX for a very long time. If you have to use it once or twice a year, so be it. Reef and Dive, thank you very much for the super chat. Appreciate that. He says, thanks so much for the advice. I have started to dose nitrates recently, so it seems like I'm on the right track. Yes, you definitely are. Right. Okay, that one's new. Brian H. says, I've heard another way to cycle a new tank is with vodka, an ammonia source, and a bacterial product. I think it's a European thing. Any idea if vodka would actually aid in the process? Man, I have no idea. I've not heard that one. When you think about carbon dosing, one of the things people used to do back in the day was to take vodka, vinegar, and sugar in a certain ratio and mix it up, and they would dose that to their tank to lower nitrate. But to cycle a tank with these 3 things, I don't know. I mean, I'm so old school. I'm like, just get a raw shrimp and throw it in the tank. It's so simple. But some people want to actually pour in something. And In that case, they have the dry rock starter kit, which has ammonia that Brightwell provides in the kit, and that gets your cycle started. And the nice thing about the Brightwell kit, the dry rock starter kit, is supposedly you can do the cycle in about 8 days. So if you are in a hurry, that kit is for you. But what you're describing, I'm not familiar with that one at all. Pickleboy says, what kind of fish can I put in a 65-gallon reef tank with a sump? Well, there's a lot of little fish. The Royal Grama is a nice one. The four-line wrasse is nice. The clown goby is nice. I think we've talked in the past about you wanting a flame angel. That would fit in that size tank, or a coral beauty, one of those two. The coral beauty is a little bit less risky compared to the flame angel, so maybe go with the coral beauty. Clownfish, pajama cardinalfish, Bengai cardinalfish. Those are just a few at the top of my head. I mean, there's a lot of little fish that will fit in smaller tanks. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up because I told you I wasn't going to do a long stream. Let's see. Claudius asked the question, I recently 3D printed an extension to my aquascape using PETG. What are your thoughts about using 3D printed rock formations? You got to use the right stuff. And I don't know which is the right one. I always forget. It's another acronym. And we want to use the right type of plastic in our aquarium. I'm sure as we move forward in this hobby, we're going to see more and more things being 3D printed, including entire aquascapes. I mean, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And it'll just be a matter of, is it porous enough? Is it strong enough? Is it safe enough? And it won't pollute? Will that work out for us? That's a possibility. I don't know. But we do have some 3D printed parts we use in our aquariums. Like I use the, right there in the corner of the shot there is a 3D printed flow accelerator. It's made by Vivid Creative Aquatics, and he uses the right plastic, whatever that is. Gordon 3D Printing out of Canada made the 3D printed part that goes around my MP40 and the anemone cube to keep anemones from getting sucked into the pump. So there are certain things we can definitely use in our tank and not be worrisome that it'll cause problems later on. Mr. Reef Buster, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. And there's another one there from Reef Eco. Thank you. Man, you guys are really generous today. Thank you so much. C-Car says, so do you think it's good to run metal halides? That is exactly what's over my tank. It's been over my tank for 16 years. So I love metal halides. I've been running them since 2000. Well, actually, I've probably been running them since 2003. But 2004 is when I put them over a 280-gallon tank, and I've never stopped ever since. Let's see. I'm just trying not to miss any questions before I end this show. Stephen Reeves says, are the new metal halides cooler to run than the old analog style? The old ones really created a challenge to keep the tank cool. No, they don't run cooler. Metal halides are hot, and their ballasts are hot. Now, the electronic ballasts don't get as hot as the magnetic ballast. They also don't have the weird hum that a magnetic ballast had, but the bulbs give off a lot of heat. And those bulbs have to be 9 to 12 inches off the water. In my case, I'm using the Lumen Bright reflectors, which have a glass shield, and it keeps all the heat way up near the ceiling. The bulb to the water on my tank is 16 inches because the Lumen Bright reflector is that powerful that having it any closer would give me like weird spotlight effects in the tank. But by raising it up, you get the nice wide swatch of light without baking the reef. But no, it's still a challenge with metal halides. You have to somehow cool the tank. I use cooling fans on the sump, and that seems to do just fine. Plus, I keep the house comfortable. Yay! We got to the name. All right, so I got to the end of the list of questions. Please do test your water, clean your skimmer. Also, check your dosing containers. Make sure all the dosing containers are full. Make sure the dosing pumps are operating. Make sure they're calibrated. If you haven't calibrated them in a while, maybe this weekend would be a good one to calibrate them and verify that when you say I want 17 milliliters of liquid, you get 17 milliliters of liquid. Also, hit the push, the force button to make it actually dose really quick, and make sure the liquid is coming out of each of the tubes. And if they're not, maybe put the tube between your finger and crunch it together and roll it back and forth to break up any congealed material they got on the end that's stopping it from dosing. And then finally, and I talk about this often, but I don't talk about it enough. If you're dosing with an automatic doser into some area in your system, it needs to be an area of high flow. A lot of people dose into their sump. Some people dose in their overflow box. Some people dose directly into the tank. But it's very important it's not just going down and falling down. You need some kind of a power head under the area where the water is churning as the dose hits, so it mixes rapidly and distributes into the system. And so if you're dosing into your sump, get a little tiny adorable power head, point it straight up under the spot so that where the water is sitting, you've got this little mound of water just constantly tumbling. Just let it run. It's not doing any harm. If anything, it kind of keeps detritus kicked up. And let it just keep the water churning, so when the dosers come on, whatever time of day that is, or multiple times a day, it quickly mixes and sends it into the system, and you don't have to use too much of a solution. If you don't do what I'm saying, and you're just trickling it in, and you think it'll magically just melt and not evaporate, but disperse, it probably won't. And what happens is the inside wall of your sump and the floor of your sump has this weird, like, white shale happening. You're thinking, well, what is that stuff? And it just seems to be getting worse. It's because the stuff is sitting and pooling and adhering to itself. But by having the power head there, you will mix it up instantly. You won't have any of that weird stuff growing on the walls or the base of your sump. And you, like I said, and that way you won't have to use too much. Because let's say, for example, let's say you want to put in 20 milliliters a day, and you have the dosing pump turned on to put in 20. Let's not even break it down into multiple little ones. Let's just say it's one dose, 20 in. And it trickles in, and it just sinks down to the bottom, and it just congeals. And your tank number doesn't come up high enough. So you go to 30. And then you go to 35. You're like, God, I'm using so much. That's so weird. It's because it's never getting into the tank. So you definitely want to have it mix. And if you're having it mix and disperse, you'll find that the amount you're using is the proper amount. And as long as the tube isn't corroded, clogged shut to where it's all clumped up, if it's open and the fluid is coming out and it's mixing properly, you're going to get exactly what the dose is supposed to do, and your numbers are going to work. But if you're not taking those little fine-tuning details, it could end up not working out as you expected, and you find you're having to put more and more of something in there, and it doesn't make sense because it's being done wrong. So we want to make sure we're doing it right. So I hope that helps you guys. I hope you have a nice weekend, and I believe I'll be here for next weekend, so I will see you guys at next stream. Bye.